Yeah, so we got a lot going on right now.
For sure. So right over here, what tank is this?
This is our lauter tun, our mash and lauter tun.
Yep.
Right now, Josh is finishing out cleaning it out from batch 1 and preparing for batch 2. Our rakes and plows do a real good job at getting the majority of the 7,000 pounds of wet grain out of the vessel, but there does usually linger some piles that can be helped along with the hose, spraying it out, pushing it to the outer edges so that it gets funneled into our chute.
Yeah.
So as he's doing that, we're moving that batch now out of our kettle and into our whirlpool.
Okay.
So we've done our 60-minute boil. Dan's currently waiting to see it switch over. We're going to make our whirlpool hop edition. Some citrus, centennial, and chinook today.
Are you all pellet hops here? Is there any liquid product that you're using along the way?
We do use some of that liquid hop product nowadays. We use a lot of T90, a lot of the CGX, the more compound stuff. But and then in some of our higher hop loads, we have been substituting like the Dyna Boost and what are the other names of the Hop Flow.
Yep.
So we're definitely experimenting with using that to try and supplement some of our beers so we get better yields out of our whirlpool and into our fermenters.
Dude, yield is such a big deal. It's like, and I know it's always a big deal, but especially once you start going up on scale,
when
you really have to be able to maximize that stuff.
126 barrels in the kettle into the whirlpool, like, yeah, the amount of loss we could or could not see.
Sure.
With just less hop product itself is always beneficial. So, it plays a huge factor in, again, our hazy IPA. We're using, what is it, like 6 kilograms of a hop resin product or a hop liquid product per batch on top of T90 pellets in there, and then a bunch of T90 and some CGX in the dry hop for that. And that's one of our heavier dry hop beers as well.
Sure. So we have, let me get a little peek.
Absolutely. It might be a bit dark, but...
So great big, no, you're good. Great big lauter tun here.
Yep.
That's awesome. And then right next to that is kettle.
Yep, so
right
this
here.
is our kettle.
And so is this a mash lauter over here?
Mm-hmm.
So mash lauter.
Mash lauter, whole thing.
Yep. And then whirlpool down here. So 3 vessel.
Yes.
Is there anything steam-wise going on with this mash lauter ton over here? Is there any adjustment that can happen, or is it primarily like a single infusion type thing, one temperature?
Correct, yeah, just one single infusion. Again, software to help us control our strike water temp.
Yep.
Our mash temp is usually not something that we're, sorry about that, not something that we're missing by and large. We're usually right on the money within the degree that we want it to be. Maybe a couple of tenths high or low, depending on the season, or if it's batch 2 going into a warm. But luckily, the software on this system controls the flow rate, controls the temperature, mixes our water from our HLT and our CLT so that we're always reaching our desired mash temp. We have probes in our giant grist case to know what temperature our malt is, and for the most part, we don't need to do any adjustments in this once we get there.
And so what size system is this? Is this a 100-barrel system?
This is a 100-barrel system.
So when you said hot liquor tank, cold liquor tank, can I see them from here?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So it's these 2 vessels closest to us.
Okay.
They're both like 120 barrels in size. Maybe like 100, oh no, definitely more than that. I think about 200 barrels in size. Our CLT stays at a stable level. Our HLT will adjust throughout the day as it supplies hot water to all facets of the brewery. We'll use them to hot rinse our fermenters, both in our 15 and 30 barrel cellar, then in our 100 barrel cellar. For the packaging equipment, our bright tanks, and then obviously up here in our 3 vessels that we brew on.
Is so that Mr. Bacon on that tank over there?
That is Mr. Bacon. Have you met Mr. Bacon? Have you met Mike?
He worked at Cartridge for a little bit. Yeah. So I know him.
Shout out Bacon.
So yeah, I'm like, dude, I'm pretty sure there's a face right there on that tank, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Bacon over there. That's hilarious.
He left us a few parting gifts before him and his family moved.
Easily accessible. Easily accessible.
No, that's not coming down for
tank.
a while. That's not coming down for a while.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, that's our 400 barrel fermenter.
Okay.
We used to have 4 of those. Yep. They were all in that space. What was it? Maybe a little over a year ago, we did a trade with another producer here in town. 3 of our vessels for a couple Brights and about 600 barrel fermenters.
Yeah.
Because we saw our product line going a little bit more horizontal and less vertical. Making more things and not as many 400 barrel batches of beer.
Sure.
So we kept one. We do about 300 barrels of lager in that. Today we're spinning that out. And then tomorrow we're going, or actually no, Thursday, 2 days from now, we'll go back into it with another 300 barrels of lager.
So when you say spitting that out, you're putting that through the centrifuge?
Yep, we're running it through our centrifuge and into our biggest Bright tank. And that'll probably get packaged Thursday, Friday.
Yep.
One of those 2 days. But yeah, nice. So that's our predominantly our lager tank. We have done big batches of Psychopathy, our like name brand IPA.
Yep.
But typically that thing is full year round with lager.
Of course. Yeah, so it's always interesting to see, and we'll roll through the cellar. But we were laughing about realizing, you know, a lot of times people don't realize how much space you need for cans when you're going to be having a larger scale canning operation. And sometimes people will just think, okay, well, we're going to have our cellar, our hot side, and packaging. But you can see, I mean, you've got to have space for those cans in here too. It's such a big part of it. One question I did have, this conical tank that's hanging right over here, what is that?
So that is our 15 barrel grist case.
I see.
If you notice, if we can point it out, above us are the chain bays that run from our 100 barrel grist case that are, that's at the end of our mill. And then the knife gate here, when it's open, it allows us to mash it on the 100 barrel system.
Sure.
But anytime we're milling and brewing on the 15, our malt will follow the same chain bay all the way down and end up in our 15 barrel grist case.
Okay.
So it's all one chain bay system, all in line. An issue that we see with that is when we maybe are lighter on our 15 barrel brew weeks, and we have a lot of 100 barrel brews, maybe 8 turns up here. A lot of that finer grain dust that doesn't make it down the chute and into our 100 barrel mash tun ends up at the bottom of this grist case and can sometimes form a bridge that when you go to mash in, you now need to manually adjust and assess for.
I love that you mentioned that, because there's always production things that people don't see coming, so that's awesome. That's
you'll
awesome.
see as we mash in our next batch that there's just going to be little bits, sometimes rice hulls, sometimes just that finer shaft material, sometimes just what looks like dust.
Yep.
That will fall down to the bottom because there's nothing in that right now. So twice a week we clean that out at the beginning and end of every week. Just a habit that we had to adopt to try and make sure that we don't put anyone through miserable pain trying to mash in on our small system.
So the first batch that you have going right now is currently you went from kettle into whirlpool. Are you fully out of the kettle right now?
We can check. Just about. Looks like we're maybe a barrel out, maybe 2 barrels out. I can see the bottom of it. And this should be pretty, real close, real high.
Yep. Oh yeah. You can see some hot matter in there.
Oh yeah, that's going. We're making IPA today.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I'm interested in is, and you can see here, there at least appears to be a difference in depth in the kettle, and even kind of looking from here to over here. I don't know if you can quite see the scope of it, but this looks like a much more squat vessel than this over here. What's kind of the idea behind that?
So our kettle runs through, we have an external calandria, an external wort boiler. And so when we are boiling, we aren't using any pumps to move that. It is just that heat system pulling it through. And so that's the thought there, whereas, you know, this being a flat bottom system, our lauter tun being flat, they're both big and wide. As with any whirlpool, right, we're just trying to coagulate everything in the center of this vessel. And it being a flat, slightly tilted as we start to empty, you'll notice, helps and aids in that process. But yeah, all the boiling done outside of the kettle. I think that's about it.
How long is the residency time? And I know it'll be different for different beers potentially, but what is that residency time like in the whirlpool right now? So we have just about all of our liquid in here. We have all of our hot products in here, and we're spinning. How long does the spin last? Kind of the rest, and then before you're knocking through the heat exchanger?
Sure. It's from the end of boil to the start of knockout, it's about 30 minutes. It'll take us 10 minutes to move that 126 barrels over, and then it'll do a 20-minute rest, and then it takes about 40-45 minutes to move all of this through the filters, through the heat exchanger, and into our fermenter in the cellar.
So the action that I'm seeing in here, this spinning, you're good on my, is that because of a pump that is for this system, or is it the force of the wort being pumped out of the kettle into here? Does this have its own individual pump, or is that just the wort coming through the tangential port over here?
Yeah, so each of our vessels have their own dedicated pump. The force you're seeing here is from the kettle pump pushing it in through the tangential arm. So once we get all of our liquid over, that stops, and this is just the residual spin that we're seeing from that first, or from the moving of the liquid over.
So the only thing that the pump is driving on this side is ultimately pushing this wort through filters and heat exchanger and everything like that.
Into our cellar.
Awesome. I always love seeing these sample and testing measuring tables here that have water supplies and whatnot. Can you walk us through, this might seem kind of weird, but can you walk us through everything that's on this panel right here? Because we obviously have our sight glass, we have a beer tap.
A beer tap. This is just, normally this is just water. Right now it's nothing.
And then what's this third thing as well?
So while we're vorloffing and sparging, the liquid will get pushed through here. So we usually have a light on. We can check the clarity of our product while we're vorloffing as we start sparge. Sample port here to take pH samples. And then this here is our chilling column. We can run CLT water that comes in through the bottom, out through the top, and then eventually down the drain. So this is, you know, fed directly from our cold liquor tank, and we'll use that to cool down any samples we're taking out of the mash tun directly, or from the sample port during vorloff or lauter when we need to check the beginning pH, the end of lauter pH, any of those kinds of samples.
Dude, these are one of my favorite things. And the larger, being able to chill that. The first time I had one of those chilling columns was when I was at Sonder. And that system wasn't like fully automated. You were still on the brew deck tapping things in through the panel. But I loved having one of those, because chilling wort, first of all, not everybody knows that all those measurement tools need that thing cooler. Sometimes I see people throwing in really hot wort into different things. That's like, it's not necessarily.
Our lab would not let us get away with that. They would not let us get away with that.